Hi, and welcome to the National New Teacher Support Podcast, brought to you by New Teacher University. And I'm your host, Dr. Terry Ross. At New Teacher University, we want to make your first years, your foundational years, and some of your best years. Tonight, we're going to talk about teacher wellness. We have with us a veteran teacher and award-winning teacher, Miss Melishia Brooks. And she's going to talk with us tonight about teacher wellness, mindfulness, and just the general self-care that teachers need to make sure that they don't burn out. Teachers, you're so important to your students, which means that you're important to their parents and you're important to the future of this country. So we want to make sure, new teachers, that you start your career off. That's one of my reasons for starting New Teacher University, because I want new teachers to have longevity and I want them to enjoy teaching. And one of the main ways we can do that is through self-care. And I was so excited when Ms. Brooks and we connected on LinkedIn. It's just a wonderful place to connect and make business connections. And she talked about teacher wellness, and I'm so glad to have her with us this evening. So, Ms. Brooks, at this time, if you'll introduce yourself and tell us how did you start with teacher wellness and what made you come up with this idea?
Thank you so much, Dr. Ross. So yeah, I'm Melishia Brooks. I am a teacher. I'm a public school teacher here in Mississippi. And the thing that made me come up with this focus on teacher wellness, especially through self-care, is because it's really what I needed as a teacher. I started my career as a teacher, as an alternate route teacher out of the Mississippi Teacher Corps at Ole Miss. And I know, we can do a whole different podcast about alternate route versus
Yes.
traditional route teaching, but it really did set me up for success within my classroom and within the communities that I worked alongside. But one thing that I always wanted and that I always needed was just some time to myself, some time to not feel so overloaded, some time to prioritize me and my personal needs, as well as my professional needs.
Yes.
And so that's really what inspired my work around wellness and mindfulness, just trying to take some of the practices that have worked for me on a personal level and
Yes.
share them with and introduce them to especially novice teachers so that they're not 6, 7, 8 years into the profession and at that critical crossroads that most educators get to, where we're trying to make that tough decision on if we're going to sign that contract next year or not. We want to keep our teachers. We want to keep them motivated. We want to keep them in the profession for many, many years. And I think that starts with teachers having the tools and the equipment to care about themselves first, so that they're always full and well and ready to go into those classrooms as whole people and not just instructors.
Well, Ms. Brooks, you said a mouthful there, and thank you so much for advocating for teachers and advocating for wellness among teachers. One of the things that when I first got into education, I'd heard so many teachers that gave so much of their time to the school that they almost neglected themselves and their families. And I wanted to make sure that starting out that I created a balance. Now, I didn't do a very good job at it. I did not. I created a better balance when I became an administrator and began to mentor teachers in terms of helping them to create that balance and helping them to find ways that we use our time that we're at work wisely so that you can disconnect and go home in the evening. And on Friday evenings, I would absolutely put teachers out of the building. So, Ms. Brooks, with that being said, and you've been an advocate for teacher wellness, and you're here now tonight with new teachers, talk to us about some of the things that they can do and just come in your own way in your presentation this evening.
Okay. I'd like to start with talking about mindfulness. I think sometimes, especially, and I'll talk a lot about my personal experience and personal stories and your personal narrative of how you got to where you are. That is so important. And I know it's cliche. We get into those professional developments and those in services, and we're here people say, don't forget your why. Remember your why, and everyone's encouraging us to think about our why, where
Yes.
you're the reason you're here. Your story is the reason that you're here. And so that's so important. And so I like to start by talking about mindfulness and why mindfulness is important. One thing that mindfulness does is it creates a self-reflective nature within us. When we're self-reflective, we know when we start getting to those points in the school year where those emotions are taking a turn for the worse, where we're entering into sort of this teacher burnout phase. And now for every teacher, that might be different. Some of us feel burnout in October. Some of us don't feel burnout until this time of year, right before state testing or spring break and that sort of thing. But being self-reflective helps you to recognize when you're reaching that burnout point so that you can start making some changes within yourself first and then within your school community to help you navigate going through that or try to avoid what we know as teacher burnout.
Yes.
And so that's one reason that mindfulness is so important, because it allows for the teachers to center their own needs above the other big picture things that we're responsible for. It's about putting ourselves first and remembering who we are, remembering what we just need as human beings. We often remind our students all the time, like, hey, I'm a human being. I have feelings, I have needs, I have interests. And sometimes we have to be mindful and remind ourselves of that very important thing. And so mindfulness is the way to get you there. And mindfulness has to be an active practice. It has to be an active practice. So I'll just go ahead and talk a little bit about self-reflection.
So let me ask a question right there.
Okay.
What is mindfulness and how do you practice it?
Okay. Mindfulness is an action word. Mindfulness is the act of being able to, whether it's in the moment or outside of the moment, making sure that you are able to be present, physically present, emotionally present, mentally present, and what's happening and what's going on. Mindfulness activities can look a lot of different ways. For me, it's daily journaling. I journal in the morning when I wake up. I journal in the evening before I go to bed. Depending on how my day is going, sometimes I have to stop. And even if I've opened a notes app on my phone and take down some notes and just write my thoughts out, that's one act of mindfulness that I can do, because it helps me to table some of those big ideas that's distracting me and getting me all caught up throughout the day, put them to the side, be mindful of them, but then also have them in a place that I can come back to. Mindfulness might look like breathing exercises for some people. It might look like a few minutes of prayer, a few minutes of just quiet, silent time. It might look like yoga. It might look like any of those things that allows for you to just sit with yourself, your thoughts, your wants, your needs at the moment, so that you are able to be more present in the areas that you need to be more mentally present in.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, because my mindfulness activity is breathing. And I'm contagious with it, because I even tell students to stop and breathe. When they come in and they're so upset, I said, stop. And it's like, and I really coach them through the process, like, take a deep breath into your nose, keep pulling. And I tell them count until I count to 5 or 6 or 7, whatever. And then I tell them to hold it and then let it go. And so often when they let that breath go, they'll smile, because there's so much information in that breath for them. There's so much to say, calm down. By the time you do all of that and get in that mindfulness mode, you have kind of like let go of some of that frustration that's in you. That's what you need, is a deep breath anyway sometimes.
That's so true. That's so true. And that's one of those easy, quick mindfulness practices that all of us can implement into our day to make sure that we're getting, what we need and being our best selves.
Yes.
Another way that we can practice mindfulness, I mentioned self-reflection. Self-reflection is very important, especially for teachers. I often tell people that people tend to, and this is just my opinion, go into teaching for a number of reasons. And we know it's not the money, right? Sometimes we go into teaching because we had really great teachers. And somewhere along the way, we had an educator or a principal or a music teacher or a coach who touched our lives so much so that we want to imitate that person in our adult years. On the flip side of that, sometimes we go into teaching because we want to be the opposite of what someone was to us. And just like in every profession, we have the good and with the bad, right?
Yes.
And so some educators go into the field of education to make a change, to say, hey, look, I didn't have great teachers, and I want to be the teacher that I needed in elementary, middle school, or high school.
Yes.
Reflecting on those things, being self-reflective, knowing your reasons, knowing what your background and your experience of school was as a student, as a parent, as a taxpayer, as a coach, whatever your roles are, being self-reflective on your stake in the school community is so important. And it allows us to make sure that we're showing up for people in the ways that we needed someone to show up for us, especially when we're new teachers. Just remembering, now, what was I doing as a seventh grader? How did I act as a seventh grader? So it allows us to lead with compassion and empathy when we're dealing with our students, our parents, our fellow team members, and all of that. It's about being able to lead with compassion and empathy, which at the end of the day allows for us to win those difficult moments and build stronger, healthier relationships with people within our school communities.
Thank you so much. And you're really talking about, not in a cliche way, but really remembering, why did I get in this profession? What's my purpose here? And that is so important, because there are days that you need to remember. I'll just say, there are days that it gets pretty dark. And like you said, we reach that point where we're saying, okay, why?
Yeah.
And you're exactly right. So new teachers, remember your why on a deep level and on a real level, because there will be days, but we want you to know that the longer you stay in the profession, the more you practice, the better you're going to get. And every day, although you're supposed to show up as the expert, because you're new, you're not the expert yet. We know that you're getting there and you're still practicing, but I guarantee you in 5 years, you will be that expert. Some of you will be that expert in 3 years.
That's so true. That's so true. And that's one thing about the teaching profession. And that's one thing that I really enjoy about your podcast is the honesty, the tools that we present here that teachers can use. Because
Yes.
I think the other thing that's important for new teachers to remember is that even at year 5, there's still going to be more work to do to hone
Yes.
this craft. There's still going to be new ways to do things. There's going to be new students flowing in and out. And so one of the most amazing things about teaching is that it's ever changing, this world of education that we're in. And so again, that's why having the tools that you need to practice mindfulness and some of those things is so important, because even as you're growing, who you are is going to evolve and become better, but you're you.
Yes.
That's one thing that if you're not an expert at anything else, you're an expert at you. And so what can I do to be my best self at all times? And if I know that I'm practicing on showing up at my best, even on the days that I may not feel like it, even on the days where my kids take a test or I don't get a stellar observation, I know that I put my best foot forward. And sometimes that confidence boost can really get us through those dark times and those hard times.
Absolutely. And it is our goal here at New Teacher University on the National New Teacher Support Podcast, that teachers can, and especially new teachers, but any teachers, they can learn what it is they need to learn without having to dedicate so much time to it. We want to do it in 3, 5, 10, 20-minute snippets where you can listen to a podcast from an expert, get the strategies, and then the things that you need to backload in. You can do it as you need it, but at least you know upfront the strategy. And many years ago, I went to a conference, and the man asked us, was it better to change the teacher's perception or their practice? And initially, I just thought practice would be better. changing the practice will be better, and especially if there's an area of deficit, because perception will change. If the practice works, the perception will change.
That is
So
so
it's,
true.
it's it's very important for new teachers, and this is one way that you can live in this profession and not be stressed out, is that you do remain open to learning,
That is so
that you
true.
continue to learn new strategies, because it is constantly changing. And if you learn the strategy, just try the strategy. If they're, just try it and see will it work. And if it works, you'll learn to love it. So continue to stay open and learn. That's one way. And that way you won't get stressed out and saying, well, I've tried everything, and you really haven't tried
Yeah,
everything.
yeah, that's good, Dr. Ross. That's really good. Um, and in some of those practices, I think teaching is one of those professions where where so much is expected of teachers. You have to be data driven. You have to have good relationships with students. You have to know how to communicate. You have all of these lists to check off.
Yes.
And oftentimes there's no quantifier for teacher wellness. There's no quantifier to identify how our teachers are doing mentally and physically and health wise. And so that's why it's so important for teachers to, just like you just said, take some of these strategies. Starting out, it may be 3 minutes of mindfulness practice at the start of your day.
Yes.
That might turn into 5. It might turn into you implementing some of this into your daily routine with your students.
Absolutely.
So that you can shape their young minds to know that, what, how I feel is important, and I can be in control of what my emotions are doing. And so one way that teachers can do that is through self-care. So Dr. Ross, you talked about how once you became an administrator, you saw the need for time for teachers to just see about and tend to themselves. This is so important. And as new teachers, you may not want to rock the boat. You may not want to go to your principal and say, hey, I need some time to myself in my planning period. I had to watch kids. You may not want to do all of that. If some of these practices aren't in place in your school building, that's okay. You can figure out what works for you. And I'm talking about self-care that's deeper than manicure, pedicure. I'm talking
Yes.
about self-care that is setting up office hours, setting boundaries, making sure that on weekends you pull away. And if you're that workaholic, if you're that perfectionist, lean into that. Give yourself time to do the thing that makes you happy. So if you say, okay, on Saturday morning, I'm going to give myself 3 hours to grade these tests, and then I'm going to give myself 3 hours to get into this really good book that I've been waiting to read, or to binge watch this TV show that I know I really want to watch, to just have that downtime, or to hang out with friends. Whatever that thing is that you've been putting on the back burner, that your true self will be happy in doing. That's what self-care is. It's not just the makeup or the hair or the going to get the facials, or, like I said, the physical part of it. We're thinking about things that genuinely bring you joy. And grading papers and planning and doing all of your teacher stuff may genuinely bring you joy. But you also deserve, a life in addition to that. I'm not going to say outside of that or instead of that. You deserve a life in addition to that.
Absolutely.
And so practicing self-care really, really helps.
So
One
Ms.
thing
Brooks, I want to right there. You said 3 hours on a Saturday morning, not at New Teacher University.
okay.
Not at New Teacher University. No, we're not advocating for that. That is your time. Figure it out in the school day. Now, I know it's going to have to happen sometimes there, because we're going to have Saturday school sometimes, maybe Saturday tutoring session. But no, we do not want you building in every Saturday that you're giving up 3 or 4 of your hours for the
Okay.
school, for your job. You're going to have to do some of that, but we want total self-care. So figure those things out. How do you help get those papers graded at school with your students? Do you need to grade the entire paper, or are we going to just grade certain aspects of the paper this time? Are we going to just look for content on this round of the draft? Then next draft, we're going to look for structure. things like that, so that every time you're not sitting down having to pour through all of this. And because at the elementary level, you can have anywhere from 18
Oh,
to 25 to 30, maybe some places 30 students. Then at the
uh-huh.
high school, you can have anywhere from 15 to 35 and 40 in some classes. So that's a lot of work, and we definitely want to advocate for teachers to know how to regulate and not give so much of their time because they have families and lives. Now, I want to ask you this: we're talking about basically we're them not burning out
Mm-hmm.
and not getting to that point. How can they regulate for that? And what is it? What kind of signs do they need to start looking for?
So I think that, and I'm going to speak from, again, my personal experience. For me, I initially knew, I knew immediately that I was facing some teacher burnout in my first and my second year teaching, leading up to the Christmas break. For me, it showed up as irritation. I had a very low tolerance for my students, very low tolerance for minor classroom behaviors. I just felt like all of my relationships with my kids were starting to crumble, and I couldn't figure out why. And the reason was because I was tired. I was tired. I was working all day. I was taking the work home. I was getting up and doing the work all over again. And it was like this never ending cycle. When I realized, Melishia, you need rest. You need rest. You deserve rest. And when I started prioritizing rest, just like you just said, Dr. Ross, over some of the other things that I had been prioritizing outside of those work hours, I started to see my mood. I started to see those relationships take a turn for the positive. And again, being able to recognize that burnout sometimes looks like tiredness. It can sometimes look like falling behind on deadlines. You could be a super organized person, lesson plans always in on time. You are maximizing your prep and your planning time, and then that burnout is creeping in, and you find yourself scrolling Facebook a little bit longer during your planning. You find yourself talking to your coworkers in the break room, about things that's not work related. That's just your mind and your body asking you for the release and the rest and the restoration that you need and deserve. And if the sooner you answer it, the sooner you make the adjustments to counter it, the better off you'll be. Because let me tell you, teachers, we can talk about the great resignation. We can talk about how teachers are leaving this profession and all those sorts of things. And when you and I'm sure you talked to hundreds of educators, Dr. Ross, who are making that difficult decision to leave the profession. And a lot of times it boils down to they need rest, they need
Yes,
restoration, they need support to feel like they can get from underneath this pile of work. They need support on knowing how to set those boundaries that you just talked about. Sometimes as a new teacher, it's not easy to say, I'm going to leave all of this on Friday and clock out and go home and disengage. Sometimes new teachers need some people like us to tell them it's okay for you to do that, because we know
yes,
that at the building level, your teachers were lucky to have a principal like you that came through that building on Friday saying, hey, listen, it's 3 o'clock. We're leaving. You're going home, and you're not taking any of this mountain of work with you. Everyone doesn't have that. And so it's important for them to hear from people like us to know that it's okay to disconnect and set those boundaries. Because once that burnout gets to you, once you're just so dragged down and tired, it's much easier to go do that application at Walmart or Target, or give up on this lifelong
Amazon,
dream.
yes.
Amazon, this lifelong dream that you've had. And we don't want teachers to do that. We want them to feel supported, and we want them to know that taking care of themselves first is always okay.
Absolutely. And I want to talk about, you said setting boundaries. Setting boundaries, new teachers, that means sometimes saying no.
Yep.
Sometimes when you're the person that can get things done, people will come to you over and over, and they'll continue to come to you.
They
Now,
will.
that was another thing as a principal. I tried to rotate the people who had responsibilities. Even in our PLCs, you didn't have the same chair every year. You didn't have the same facilitator every week. We wanted to make sure that the roles rotated so that no one got burned out with it. And sometimes in schools, and especially if it's a small staff, uh, leaders will have to go to the same people a lot. But we want teachers, we want you to have the courage sometimes to say no, because we don't want you to burn out. And we do want you to show up, not just for your students, but show up for yourself. Because no teacher comes to school and want to do a bad job. And I thank you for sharing what you shared about when you noticed the signs of burnout, that small things began to irritate you. And your students that you normally knew were just being 10, 11, 12-year olds, or whatever age they were irritating you when you knew and had been trained to know that they were going to do those things. So thank you for sharing that and elevating that for the new teacher, so that they'll know that when you're feeling that way sometimes, don't just make a drastic decision. Know that you may just need to step away for a minute, and you may not need the next day off. You may just need to ask, can you step out of your room and breathe for a second? Because sometimes you'd have to do that. And I've gone to several schools recently where they've set up wellness rooms for teachers. They have treadmills in them. One school have massage chairs in there. They have dim lighting. They have coffee pots and tea kettles and just different things. And I'm so excited to see that schools are doing that for teachers.
Yeah. And sometimes, like you just said, stepping out. One thing that I actively do this year is our cafeteria is in a separate building from our academic building. And so we have to walk outside. And so sometimes my students and I do this for myself, and they just benefit from it. Sometimes when we leave lunch, and the lunch block can be a lot. It can be hectic, long lines, the wait is longer, somebody forgot their milk, it can just be a drag to your day almost. And so sometimes when I'm leaving lunch and those emotions are high, for myself, when my emotions are high and I just need a minute as we're getting ready to go straight back into the classroom for instruction, we'll just take the long way around the building. And so we'll just, instead of going in the building and walking all through the halls, we'll just walk outside. We'll just walk all the way around. It's not taken away from instruction. We got to walk back to class anyways, but I can get that fresh air. I can get that sun on my face, that wind in my hair, and just those 2 minutes is going to take us to walk around that building, allows this sort of decompression and this sort of care for what's happening with my emotions, that allows me to immediately show back up for the students in a real way. So again, finding parts of your day where you can make simple adjustments, easy adjustments, where you don't have to ask anyone permission. You don't have to rework the whole school day or your instructional block, but just those few moments built into your school day as a routine will start to help you build and release and practice these self-care and mindfulness activities, so that you can see a more positive result.
Okay. And I noticed you talked about self-reflection as well. Let's remind, because reflection is so key. Reflection brings perspective. And so often we just run out with everything on us that we don't stop and take time to gain perspective and to reflect so that we can leave today and today. The worst thing we can do is bring something that a 7-year-old said or did from Tuesday into Wednesday. The only reason we need to bring it in there if we remember, so that we can help guide them to the space that they need to be, but definitely not for a grudge or that we're taking it personal. So we have to remember that we're the adult in the classroom, and reflection is so key. So what are some tips for self-reflection?
For me, it's journaling. And that's why I created the self-reflection journal for teachers, because being taking intentional time outside of the classroom, when you're out of the school building, out of those four walls, to sit and critique and praise and commend yourself and lift yourself up, that's really important. That, especially as a new teacher, right? Because you're in that classroom, you know what the small wins were. You know that today you asked Kevin to sit down one time and he did it, versus 2 days ago you asked Kevin 10 times and he sat down, after 10 minutes. Small wins, and you can celebrate those victories for yourself through self-reflection. Another good way to be self-reflective is when those administrators and lead teachers and people are coming in to observe your class, and they give you those observations, that yes, you look for the instructional things, but then you also look for and ask for, advocate for the support that you need around how you show up as a teacher. How do you, some good questions to ask to be self-reflective about that is, when you observe my class, how would you describe my teacher presence? What are some things that I could do to better improve how I was showing up for my students? Have challenged your administrators and the people who are observing your class to give you those tips and to sort of help you with that advice, because again, your instruction can be, your kids can be performing at a high instructional level, but if the relationships are not there, then you could still start experiencing some of that burnout, because you're still going to feel like you're doing this with the kids. Yeah. And so talking to a peer, doing peer observations, and those sorts of things, asking a peer to come in and say, hey, I'm having a really hard time winning this relationship, and I noticed that you have a good relationship with this student. Can you just come and watch my class and give me some tips and some advice? And then you take that and you reflect on the parts of yourself that you know on a deeper level that you could possibly work on, and then you commit yourself to making those changes. A lot of the practice with self-reflection, how I look at it is, at the end of every day, I try to give myself 3 wins and 1 thing that I can change for tomorrow. Because like you just said, there's no point in dragging all of these negative things with me into the next day. So I try to highlight what were 3 positive things, or I have 4 classes. What's 1 positive thing that happened in each of those classes, and what's 1 thing that I want to work on for tomorrow? And then I try to lead my next day with doing that, improving on that thing. So again, that self-reflection piece, I think is so important. And the other thing that it does, Dr. Ross, is it prepares you for the inevitable. We know that as new teachers, you're going to get those bad observations. You're going to get the poor test data. You're going to get the issues with the students and the parents that's calling and doing all of these things. There's going to be a lot of negative things that may come your way. When you're self-reflective, you're already ready for that, because you're your own biggest critic, but you're also your own biggest cheerleader. And so when you know a lesson didn't go well, reflect on that. What could I have done better? What will I do better next time? And then you implement those things instead of like letting yourself get down about it. Mm-hmm. So when someone comes in and you get that observation, you say, yeah, I've actually been working on my time management within my lessons. And so even though I'm still not where I want to be, I have time management on my mind, because every day I reflect on how I can get those things on a positive instead of a negative way. So that's the other benefit of self-reflection, is that you're already ready when some of those negatives come your way, because you have a plan of action to deal with those things, instead of just knowing that these are some things that are wrong and not having the tools to fix them.
Well, Ms. Brooks, thank you so much. Your expertise has meant so much this evening, because you've dropped a lot of gems. There are a couple of things I want to pick out this evening that, well, not this evening, but just what you just said. One is, it's revolutionary, you said, for teachers to have to ask for feedback during the evaluation process. Most teachers want to get the feedback and say, hey, let's, oh, this is a good evaluation, let's go. But you're saying, probe your administrators, how can I get better at this? And that is how you get better. You have to have quality feedback. And I've always been stunned when I have teachers to say, well, how could I do this? If I give them the feedback and tell them the feedback that I'm giving them, and then they go a step further and say, okay, you're saying to do this, how would that look? And how with this situation? And I love that, because it challenges me. And I have had a couple of times where teachers, they've asked me questions where well, not a couple of times, a number of times, that I have to go and get the support that they need. I have to go back to my my teacher leaders in the building and say, this person, or Miss So and So or Mr. So and So, they need this and they ask this question, and I'd like you to go and share this with them. And I told them that you would be a resource. So I did not always have the answer, but I knew where to go and get the answer. And then something else you said about self-reflection, I've forgotten that, but I don't want to skip past this. You said you have a journal for teachers.
Yes.
Let's talk about that.
Okay.
Do you have a
So,
copy of it that you can hold up and show?
yeah, we're right here. Let's see. All right, so it's reflection and active self-care.
Okay.
And it's for educators. And the quote that inspired me to even begin writing this journal is an Audre Lorde quote. And it says, caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare. That's so powerful and so important. It's
Yes,
not
it is.
selfish for you to put the work down. It's not selfish for you to see about yourself first. Okay. It's an act of self-preservation. And if you are committed to being in this profession, you're going to have to learn how to self-care. And so the reflection journal is designed for a school year. And I share it's for 4 quarters, and there are reflection prompts along the way throughout the journal that you can write on, and then some space for you to just have some open journaling and that sort of thing. And I share some of my personal stories of being a first-year teacher in the Mississippi Delta, thinking that I had it all together. I'm going to go in there and save the world, and I'm going to connect with these kids, and quickly realizing that I was far removed from what these kids wanted and needed and were interested in. And I didn't have the support at the building level that I needed to feel like I could be successful. And so I created this journal because I don't want new teachers to feel that way. I want new teachers to feel empowered and supported to go into their classrooms and make the adjustments that they've worked so hard to be able to make, to win relationships with their students, to build relationships with their coworkers, and all of those sorts of things. So some of the topics in the journal range from the beginning of the school year, you just having a fresh start, being intentional about setting your goals, being intentional about setting goals that center you as the classroom teacher and you as the person. Focusing on the good. Again, as a new teacher, sometimes we can get so caught up on all the things we need to fix and change and improve. And in this journal, there's a whole section that have you be more intentional about. Talk about something good that happened today. Think about your most difficult student. Now write all the positive things that you can about that person, or think about your most difficult coworker. Write all of the good and positive interactions that you've had, because it tricks our mind to be in a different mindset. And so tomorrow, when you see that person, you're thinking, he made me laugh the other day. And you might interact with that student and say, remember that day you had me laughing? Tell me that joke again. And now you're on a positive footing with a student, just because you took the time out to really put, and it might take a push now because we know some of them can be hard, but you have the mindset to go in and be positive.
That's next level, Ms. Brooks. That is really next level. Thank you so much for sharing that. And you really put a lot of thought in that. I love that, because those are all, we are what we think.
Yep.
And if we begin to think positive about the things and the people in our life, they began to show up like that, because what irritate us is really what's inside of us.
What's inside of us. That's true.
And I'm learning to work that out, but that's a whole nother podcast right there. Tell us where we can get your journal.
You can go to Amazon.com, and you can type in my name or the name of the journal, Reflection and Active Self-Care. It's currently on sale because we're a good way through the school year now. And if there are any administrators or lead teachers or district people who would like to have a conversation about being more intentional about what some of this programming might look like within your school, then of course you're welcome to email me at brookseduconsulting@gmail.com, and I'm happy to help or mentor or just be a light for any new teacher programming or new teacher mentorship that's out there, because it is so important. We're all in this together from state to state. And one thing I want to say, Dr. Ross, is especially in the South, we have a time ahead of us in our southern states, especially. There's a war on education, and we have to be on the front lines, and we have to advocate for ourselves. But more importantly, we have to be well enough that we can advocate for our students to make sure that they continue to receive what they need, and that they have good, strong teachers in the classroom supporting them and getting them to where they need to be.
Well, Ms. Brooks, I want you to email me all of the information so I can put it underneath the podcast when I post it, so they can just click on the links, get your book, get in contact with you. Thank you so much again for joining us on the National New Teacher Support Podcast, brought to you by New Teacher University. Ms. Brooks, would you like to have anything else, any closing words to say to our new teachers?
Just don't forget about you. You are important. Your health matters. Your mental health matters. And not in any cliche way or any of that, but you're important. And so take some time out for yourself to truly find the things and do the things that bring you joy.
Thank you so much again, Ms. Brooks, for joining us on the National New Teacher Support Podcast, brought to you by New Teacher University.